At this point in time, it's been 10 years since the Doctor first graced televisions in the UK. And to kick off the first ever 10th anniversary, when counting by 10, we kick off with a bang. The Doctor meets the Doctor, and the Doctor. It seems a strange energy drain is coming from a black hole which leads to an antimatter universe, much like the one Kirk visited that one time. And from this antimatter universe emerge creatures that look like jujube vomit Cyclops Yetis with crab claws that shoot energy. Because Doctor Who. And it seems they're gunning for the Doctor. Eventually, the Doctor manages to figure out how to enter this antimatter universe and confront whoever's been trying to reach him, but not before the Time Lords, who are seriously wigging out over this development, decide to send his second incarnation, and we, the fans, get to see Patrick Troughton return triumphantly as the second Doctor. And of course, neither the second Doctor nor the third Doctor get along with one another, mainly because the second Doctor keeps messing about with his recorder. And I can see where the third Doctor is coming from. It can be a bit annoying. So, with power quickly draining from the Time Lords' sources, they try to send the first Doctor to sort to sort the two men out. Unfortunately, they could only send him partway through. So he can only observe and advise. He can't be there in person. Now, this was because Bill Hartnell was getting on in years and not feeling well, so they had him in a studio reading off cue cards. But for the last time, we get to see Bill Hartnell as the first Doctor, and it was glorious. I admit, I got a little misty-eyed when I saw him on screen. Anyway, the three Doctors put their heads together and discover that in the antimatter universe, someone is alive. None other than the person responsible for granting the Time Lords their near limitless power, a guy named Omega. He figured out a way to partially blow up stars in order to harness their power. Unfortunately, he got sucked into a black hole and wound up in the antimatterverse and was given up for dead by the other Time Lords. No one knew of his plight, so he just assumed he was a sacrificial lamb, and he spent a long time stewing in his resentment, eventually figuring out a way to plan his revenge. He brought the Doctor into the antimatterverse in order to use him as a mental power source to get out of the antimatterverse, because even though Omega's will is strong enough to create and destroy many things in the verse, he can't leave, because once he tries to leave, the power of his will is negated. So he's basically gonna switch places with the Doctor. Unfortunately, being right next to a black hole singularity is kind of sort of massively caustic to the body. Unfortunately, all that's left of him is his will and his voice, and it drives him insane. He decides to just tear it all down, blow everything up. forget revenge, he's just taking everyone with him. Meanwhile, the second Doctor plays the long game, reveals his dark chessmaster persona. Remember, he was waffling on about his recorder. That's because he intentionally stuck it in the TARDIS's shield generator. And when the TARDIS was pulled through, the recorder was not converted into antimatter like everyone and everything else was. So when he gives it to Omega and he smashes the shield generator, that causes the matter of the recorder to hit the antimatter of everything else, and boom. Thus giving Omega the only freedom he has available to him now. The freedom to finally die peacefully. And I'm sure he'll never bother anyone again. Would you excuse me a moment? Sorry, the cat. Anyway, we get a heartwarming reunion between the Brigadier and the second Doctor, and a heartwarming goodbye between all three Doctors, and it really is an awesome adventure to kick off the 10th anniversary season of Doctor Who. I highly recommend it, because despite the hit and miss effects and the non-threat of the minions of Omega, it really is a fairly well-paced adventure. And at the end, the Time Lords actually give the Doctor back his ability to travel in the TARDIS. So that's a win. Unfortunately, the Doctor isn't totally in control of the TARDIS. He still screws up every now and then. Case in point, when he and Jo encounter the Carnival of Monsters. They try to go to Metabolus 3, only to wind up on a boat in the Indian Ocean. And they meet a few colorful characters before the boat encounters a plesiosaur. And then for some reason, everyone starts basically talking about stuff they were talking about earlier again, like they were in a time loop. Eventually, it's discovered that the Doctor and company are trapped inside a machine that's owned by a space carny and his assistant. And they've taken this essentially fishbowl to a planet of gray guys who are basically space bureaucrats with not a lot of trust and support of one another. There's a subplot about one low-ranking member trying to take over from another one, and it nearly gets everyone killed. Anyway, the Doctor and Jo figure out how to break out of the enclosure which houses the boat full of humans. And they discover another enclosure which houses these multi-eyed snake dragon things that are voracious hunters. And unfortunately, the snake dragon things, they end up breaking out of their enclosure and threatening, well, basically everyone. Meanwhile, outside the machine, it's revealed that not only are humans and snake dragons trapped in the device, but also Cybermen and the minions of the Daleks, the Ogrons, whose name escaped me last time I mentioned them. But, thankfully, with help from the Space Carney, who actually saves the day at one point when the snake dragons break out of the machine, the Doctor manages to figure out a way to deactivate the nearly indestructible device and sends everyone back to where they came from and when they came from. And one of the human passengers inexplicably seems to have a dim recollection of what happened to them. Apparently the boat was supposed to be like a Marie Celeste type disappearance, but wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, it never happened. And it was a cute adventure, although the snake dragon puppets are hit and miss when it comes to their believability. Although I think kids in the early 70s must have been covering their eyes when those things came on the scene, because there were times when they were intimidating. On our next adventure, we head out to a frontier in space. Once again, the Doctor is trying to get to Metebelis 3, only to end up on a spaceship which gets attacked seemingly by people from the planet Draconia. And the Doctor and Jo get sort of caught up in this political powder keg between Earth and Draconia, because the Draconians say they never attacked anyone. Earth was attacking them. And that's exactly what the people on the Earth ships were saying. Turns out it was Ogrons the whole time. Yes, apparently the minions of the Daleks have expanded. And they somehow have access to sonic devices that target the fear centers of the brain. And they're basically playing up the fears of the humans and the Draconians. Eventually, the Doctor and Jo are labeled as spies from both sides because they keep bouncing back and forth between both parties. And eventually, a representative of Sirius 4 shows up with a laundry list of crimes that supposedly the Doctor and Jo are guilty of. Only the representative turns out to be the Master, and he's currently controlling the Ogrons. Ogrons, I should say. Eventually, the Doctor decides to wash his hands of the whole thing, and despite being wounded, manages to get the TARDIS and get the Allons-y out of there, along with Jo. Eventually it's revealed that it's not the Master pulling the Ogron strings. It's the Daleks. Yep, they're still loyal to them. And seeing as the Daleks are involved, the Doctor decides to send a message to the Time Lords. And so for the first time, the story hasn't completely resolved itself. The plot carries over into the planet of the Daleks, where instead of landing on Skaro, which is in fact the planet of the Daleks, they land on the equally inhospitable planet Spiridon, populated by invisible beings who are fairly intelligent and who've been subjugated by the Daleks in a plot to develop a virus capable of destroying anything that's not inoculated, and B, unleash a cryo-frozen army of Daleks. Because instead of lava, the volcanoes that dot the planet are actually filled with liquid ice. Basically, instead of freezing solid, water turns to this gelatinous fluid, which is super cooled. So you really don't want to get covered in it either. I mean, instead of lava, I mean. Anyway, as luck would have it, a squad of Thals from Skaro have landed on the surface and hook up with the Doctor and Joe, even saving them from this fungus, which come from these squirting flowers. And together, they work to thwart the Daleks' plans and basically return the planet to what's left of the population's original inhabitants. Well, the planet's original inhabitants. They even get one ally among the invisible beings, who sadly sacrificed himself in order to prevent the Daleks from using the modified virus that they cooked up. And eventually the days went out, but Joe, well, let's just say she starts having second thoughts about traveling with the Doctor, because she actually starts falling for one of the Thals, but decides against going with him back to Skaro, because she's still loyal to the Doctor. And eventually, it all comes to a head in The Green Death. Now, this serial was a bit difficult for me to watch because it has scenes of live fly larvae, and yes, I know there's another word for that description, but I can't say it because if I say it, I'll get nauseous. I know, it's one of my phobias. Anyway, a chemical facility in Wales has shut down the local coal mine in favor of petroleum, and that's put a lot of Welsh workers on the street. Not only that, the facility is producing this toxin which acts like a virus on human tissue. People have actually died from it, and the company is keeping it under wraps. Furthermore, it's mutated some dragonflies, and their spawn, the aforementioned larvae, have grown to 2 feet in length, covered in this toxic slime, and have developed sharp fangs at the end of their bodies. Yeah, basically they're wolf larvae. Very, very dangerous. To say nothing of the slime they're covered in. Eventually they make it to the surface and threaten everyone, because eventually one of them manages to pupate and becomes a giant dragonfly which can squirt the green slime. So, yeah, they're very dangerous. And the main reason that the chemical facility is covering things up is because the humans are no longer in control. They developed a computer which was connected to a human brain to increase productivity and efficiency. But unfortunately, it's another Wotan. It went all Skynet and decided to start hypnotizing humans and connecting to other computers in order to take over the world. Of course. Now, a lot happens to the point where it drags a bit. I agree with SF Debris. It should have been 4 episodes, not 6. But what we do get is fairly entertaining. A bit of the Doctor using his disguise mastery to infiltrate the facility. We see Captain Yates as a double agent inside the facility. We see the Doctor finally get to Metebelis 3 alone, which turns out to be very, very hostile. And he even picked up a souvenir, a blue crystal, which ends up being useful at dehypnotizing people who've been exposed to the computer's effects. Also, Joe decides to join a commune of intelligent hippies. I know, that's a contradiction, but bear with me. Who are protesting the chemical facility. And she even falls for this Professor Jones character who is working on a fungal replacement for meat. And unfortunately, her clumsiness from a couple of episodes earlier starts to shine through. Because she keeps accidentally knocking stuff over because she's distracted by him. Luckily, at one point, while they're working on ways to combat the slime, her clumsiness actually helps. She knocks over some of the fungus that Jones has been working on, and it neutralizes the slime and proves to be poisonous to the larva. As for the dragonfly, which nearly killed the Doctor and Benton, he killed it by throwing his coat over it, which I guess caused it to crash and break its neck. I mean, we hear a crunching noise, so that's my general observation. We also see a lot of stereotypical Welsh. And frankly, I didn't mind them. I mean, I don't see why... well, I'm getting off topic. Bottom line, it should have been a little shorter, but overall it was a decent adventure, which ended with the human that the computer was connected to turning against it thanks to that special blue crystal. Eventually all the larvae were destroyed. The computer was destroyed along with the facility. Jo pulls some strings with her uncle, who apparently works at the UN, to get some funding for the hippies to work on their projects. And maybe get some jobs for the local Welsh. And ultimately, she decides to part ways with the Doctor. Over the course of the adventure, she fell for Dr. Jones, or Professor Jones, and she and he are going to get married and go traipsing through the Amazon looking for more fungal samples to work as meat substitutes. And the Doctor toasts to her good fortune and leaves. And the look on his face really sells the idea that he's an ancient being. While he meets people along the way, he ultimately travels alone. And while it is bittersweet, I'm happy for Jo. And overall, her ending story arc was decent. And with that, we come to the end of yet another Doctor Who season, when next we meet the Doctor. He and the audience meet one of the greatest companions ever to live, Sarah Jane Smith. Until then, this is Mr. J signing out and reminding you, Venusian Aikido is cool, Daleks are awesome villains, and while companions come and go, there will always be the Doctor and the TARDIS. Allons-y.